You think she's weak? Wait until you see what happens next. Sarah Walker stood at the edge of the room, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to steady her breath. The whispers around her felt louder than ever, each one a reminder of the life she could never escape, an endless cycle of judgment, shame, and struggle. As a single mother, every day was a battle. But today, in this grand ballroom, it felt like the world was watching her fail. She didn't fit in with the glossy, perfectly tailored crowd, women in silk dresses, men in expensive suits. She stood out, and not in the way she hoped. Her son's daycare bill still hadn't been paid, and her job at the small boutique barely kept them afloat. She's just here to collect pity, one woman sneered. How sad, isn't it? Another voice whispered, louder this time, she'll never get anywhere. A single mom can't do it all. Sarah's heart sank as the cruel words echoed around her. She had heard them 1,000 times before, but today, in this glittering space filled with power and wealth, they hurt more than ever. The laughter continued, but she didn't break. Instead, she held her head high. She had no choice but to survive. But then, in the middle of her humiliation, something unexpected happened. Lucas Bennett, the billionaire businessman she had never imagined even noticing her, stepped into the room. His eyes locked with hers for just a moment, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. Lucas was everything Sarah wasn't: powerful, ruthless, and untouchable. His reputation preceded him. He was known for making cold, calculated decisions, and nothing seemed to matter to him more than his business empire. But now, as Sarah stood there, invisible to most but painfully exposed, Lucas walked toward her. The crowd seemed to part as he approached, his sharp features locked in an expression of unreadable intent. For a moment, it was as if the world had slowed down. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Lucas stopped in front of her, his gaze never leaving hers. The room went silent. And then, before Sarah could fully comprehend what was happening, he did the unthinkable. Lucas Bennett, the billionaire who had it all, kneeled in front of her. The people around them gasped, a collective intake of breath hanging in the air. He took her hand gently, his touch warm and steady against the coldness of the room. For a second, Sarah felt the weight of the world lift, but she couldn't process it. Was this a pity move? A stunt? Or was something deeper happening here? Her heart raced as the weight of the moment sunk in. She had never imagined in her wildest dreams that this man would kneel before her, someone society had written off long ago. But as he held her hand, a small, quiet part of her began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was more than she could have ever hoped for. The room was still. Every eye was on Sarah, but the weight of their stares felt different now. Lucas held her hand gently, his strong fingers enveloping hers with an unexpected warmth. It wasn't pity, it wasn't a power play. For the first time, Sarah felt like she wasn't invisible. The whispers started again, but they were softer now, filled with confusion and disbelief. "What's he doing?" someone muttered. "He's never done anything like this before." But Lucas didn't seem to care. He remained kneeling, his gaze never wavering from hers. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, though the silence in the room made it sound almost too loud. Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. Her heart was racing. She had no idea what he was thinking. Was this some sort of game to him? Or was he really offering something genuine? For a brief moment, she thought of pulling her hand away, but something in his eyes held her back. The cynicism she had built up over the years, the walls she'd carefully constructed around herself, began to crack. I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucas stood up slowly, never releasing her hand. "You don't have to know right now," he said, his words strangely comforting. "But I can help. Whatever you need, I can help." Sarah wanted to push him away, to say she didn't need anyone's help. She had done this alone for so long, had built a life with nothing but her own determination. But the sincerity in his voice made it hard to argue. She was used to struggling in silence, keeping everything locked inside. But now, standing here with Lucas, she felt the strangest pull. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let someone in, but she knew she couldn't keep doing this alone. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. Lucas gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Because you're not alone anymore," he replied softly, his eyes filled with something Sarah couldn't quite place. He wasn't just offering her help. He was offering her something more, a chance at something different. The tension in the room had shifted. The crowd, who moments ago had been so quick to mock her, now looked at her with curiosity, some with envy, others with judgment. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. Sarah wasn't going to let their opinions define her anymore. She wasn't going to let their whispers drown out the quiet strength she was beginning to recognize within herself. Lucas had offered her a hand, but it wasn't just his physical touch that had changed everything. It was the way he saw her. The way he didn't just look at her as the struggling single mother, but as someone worthy of respect, of care, of something more. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to believe it. As they walked out of the room together, the whispers faded, replaced by a new sense of possibility. It wasn't the end of her journey, but the beginning of something much more. Something that could change everything. The next few days were a blur for Sarah. Lucas had insisted on helping her with everything. Her bills, her job situation, even the daycare fees she had been struggling to pay. But every time he offered his support, a part of her pulled away. She wasn't used to depending on anyone. She wasn't used to being treated like she mattered. She had spent so long being overlooked, dismissed by others, that the kindness Lucas showed her felt almost unreal. She found herself questioning his motives. Why was he doing this? Was it out of guilt? Pity? Or was he truly offering a chance for something more? The answers were elusive. One afternoon, Lucas called her and asked her to meet him for lunch at a cafe downtown. When she arrived, she was surprised to see him dressed casually, a rare sight for the usually impeccably dressed billionaire. He was already seated at a corner table, looking at his phone. "Sarah," he said with a smile when she walked in. "I'm glad you could make it." She sat down, her mind racing. "You didn't have to do all of this," she began, her voice hesitant. "You didn't have to help me with my bills. Or anything else." Lucas leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "I know I didn't have to, but I wanted to. You're not alone in this, Sarah. And you never have to be." She stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. He was always so sure, so confident. But there was something different about him now. He wasn't the cold, distant billionaire she had first met. There was warmth in his eyes, a softness in his voice that she hadn't expected. "I don't know if I can trust this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been burned before. People always let me down." Lucas's gaze never wavered. "I won't let you down," he said simply. "Not now, not ever." His words hit her harder than she expected. She felt a knot in her throat. Could it be true? Could someone actually care enough to not hurt her? She had spent so many years keeping herself guarded, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of trusting again. But Lucas was making it hard to keep that wall up. She looked down at the table, trying to steady herself. "I don't know how to be around someone like you," she said quietly, her hands clasped together tightly in her lap. "I've never been treated like this." Lucas reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. His touch was gentle, but firm. "Then let me show you," he said softly. "Let me show you that not everyone is going to walk away. Not everyone is going to hurt you. Not everyone will judge you for your past." Sarah took a deep breath. The weight of his words settled in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe him. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversations that felt different, more genuine, more open. And by the time she left the cafe, she knew that something had shifted between them. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but she knew that this was just the beginning of a journey she had never imagined taking. One where she wasn't just surviving, but actually living. The days that followed were filled with an unexpected sense of calm for Sarah. She had never imagined that her life could change so quickly. Lucas's presence in her world was a constant reminder that not all men were like the ones who had left her behind. He had done more for her in a few days than most people had in her entire life. Yet, despite the growing warmth between them, Sarah still couldn't fully shake off the doubt that clung to her. She had been hurt too many times, her trust shattered by those who promised things they never followed through on. But Lucas, he was different. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. He didn't just talk about helping her. He actually did. He made sure that her son's daycare was paid for in advance. He helped her get a better-paying job at a nearby store, one that offered her more stability. And when she was too proud to accept his help with her car repairs, he had it fixed for her without her knowing. She had no idea how to process all of this. Was this how normal relationships worked? Was this how people were supposed to treat each other? But the more time she spent with Lucas, the clearer it became that she couldn't keep pushing him away. One evening, after work, Lucas invited her over to his apartment. It was the first time she had been to his place, and she wasn't sure what to expect. She had seen his public persona, the powerful, untouchable billionaire who ran everything with ease, but she had no idea who he was when the facade was gone. When she arrived, he greeted her with a warm smile and a casual, "Come in." His apartment was nothing like she had imagined, cold, empty, and impersonal. Instead, it was warm, inviting, and full of subtle touches that spoke to the man behind the business empire. The soft lighting, the vintage furniture, and the books scattered around the room gave the place a feeling of comfort. It wasn't the home of a billionaire. It was a place where someone could relax, someone who didn't always want to be the powerful businessman the world saw. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made pasta," Lucas said, gesturing to the dining table. "I hope that's okay." Sarah smiled, surprised by the gesture. "It's perfect." As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about everything: her son, his childhood, their hopes for the future. For the first time, Sarah felt like she wasn't talking to a man who saw her as a project or a charity case. She wasn't just a single mother to him. She was Sarah. And that realization hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so much of her life feeling invisible, but here, in this quiet apartment, with Lucas, she felt seen. "You don't have to keep your guard up with me, you know," Lucas said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but there was an edge of vulnerability in it that made her stop mid-bite. "I know it's hard to trust people after everything you've been through, but I'm not going anywhere." The words settled between them, and for the first time, Sarah felt the heavy weight of her past begin to lift. Maybe, just maybe, she could let herself believe in something good again. The next few weeks felt like a dream that Sarah was afraid to wake up from. She had been living her life for so long with one foot in survival mode, but now, with Lucas by her side, it felt like she was finally starting to live. He didn't just offer her help, he offered her a chance at something more. Something she had never allowed herself to believe in: trust. As much as she wanted to hold on to her skepticism, to keep her walls up, Lucas made it harder and harder to resist. One rainy evening, Sarah found herself waiting outside her son's school for the principal to give her an update on his progress. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down to see a message from Lucas. "How about dinner tonight? Just the two of us, no interruptions." She smiled to herself. The idea of spending time with him, away from everything, felt comforting. It wasn't just about the dinner, it was about the fact that he wanted to spend time with her, wanted to know her better. When she arrived at the restaurant, Lucas was already there, sitting at a corner booth, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes bright with admiration. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but she quickly brushed it off. "Thanks. You clean up pretty well yourself." He chuckled, a sound that made Sarah's heart skip. As they sat down to eat, their conversation was easy. No more awkwardness, no more hesitation. It felt natural, like they had been doing this for years. They talked about their pasts, their families, their hopes for the future. Sarah found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in a long time, and Lucas listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. He just listened. It felt different from anything she had experienced before. With him, she felt like she didn't have to prove herself, like she could just be who she was. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a burden. As the evening went on, Lucas's presence began to feel like home. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other, one conversation at a time. But just as Sarah was starting to relax, Lucas said something that caught her off guard. "I know you've been through a lot, Sarah. And I know you're afraid to trust again. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm not like the others." His words hung in the air, heavy and real. Sarah looked at him, her heart racing. She knew he meant it. She could see it in his eyes, the sincerity that had been there from the moment they first met. But even as she wanted to believe him, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder, was it too good to be true? Was she just setting herself up for another disappointment? But before she could voice her doubts, Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady, a silent promise that spoke louder than words ever could. "I'm here, Sarah. And I'll always be here," he said softly. She looked down at their hands, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe. Believe that maybe, just maybe, she could trust again. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Days passed, and Sarah found herself slowly letting go of the doubt that had clung to her for so long. Lucas's words, his actions, they weren't just empty promises. They were real. But the more time she spent with him, the more she found herself falling into the warmth of his presence. It wasn't just his help with the practical things, it was how he made her feel. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like a burden. But despite the growing closeness between them, Sarah was still cautious. The walls she had built over the years were strong, and they weren't easy to break down. She had been hurt before, too many times, by people who had promised her the world only to take it away. Lucas had never done anything to make her doubt him, but the scars from her past were not easily erased. One afternoon, Sarah was sitting in her small apartment, going through bills, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Lucas. "I know you're busy, but when you get a chance, can we talk? I have something important to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he wanted to talk about, but the way he worded it made her nervous. Was this it? Was he going to tell her he couldn't do this anymore? She tried to push the thought away, but it lingered in her mind as she drove to meet him. When she arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to meet, Lucas was already there, sitting at a table near the window. He looked up when she walked in and smiled, but there was something different in his eyes, something serious. "Hey," he said softly, his voice warm as always. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, though she could feel the nervousness bubbling inside her. She sat down across from him, her mind racing. "You said you wanted to talk about something," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Lucas took a deep breath and looked down at the table for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, his words measured, careful. "And I know things have been moving pretty fast. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I also don't want to keep pretending that what we have is just nothing." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. She had been trying not to think about what was happening between them, trying not to get her hopes up. But hearing him say it out loud made everything feel real. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas took her hand across the table, his touch warm and reassuring. "I mean, I care about you, Sarah. I care about you more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. I don't want to lose what we have." Sarah's heart raced. She wasn't sure what to say. The words were there, waiting on the tip of her tongue, but fear held her back. She had spent so long protecting herself from getting hurt, but now, standing in front of Lucas, it felt like everything was on the line. Could she let herself believe in this? Could she really trust him? Let him in? She looked at him, his eyes full of sincerity, and for the first time, she allowed herself to admit it. "I care about you too," she said softly. The words felt like a weight lifting off her chest, a burden she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Lucas smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Sarah feel like she was the only person in the room. "Then let's not let fear hold us back anymore," he said, squeezing her hand. And in that moment, Sarah knew that, no matter what happened, this was a new beginning. A beginning where she wasn't alone anymore. A beginning where trust and love could finally take root. The days after that conversation felt different. Sarah had allowed herself to truly believe in something again. There was a quiet peace between her and Lucas, one that hadn't existed before. No more barriers, no more walls between them. They were two people just trying to make something work, to trust in each other. It was strange, at first, to feel so open, but it also felt freeing. Her son, Luke Jr., had noticed the change in his mother too. He saw the way she smiled more, the way she seemed lighter, less burdened. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, Sarah had felt trapped by her circumstances. Now it felt like everything was falling into place. But as much as she wanted to let go of the past, it kept creeping in. One evening, as Sarah was making dinner for herself and her son, she got a call from her landlord. "Sarah," the voice on the other end said, "I'm afraid I have bad news. The building is being sold, and the new owners want to raise the rent significantly. I need you to come by and sign the new lease by tomorrow, if you want to stay." Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't planned for this. The rent had already been tight as it was, and the thought of paying even more was terrifying. She tried to calm herself down, but it wasn't easy. She hung up the phone, staring at it for a moment before putting it down. The weight of it all pressed against her chest, and she felt a familiar wave of panic rise up inside her. She couldn't afford to move, but she also couldn't afford to stay. She couldn't keep feeling like this. Just as she was about to lose herself in the spiraling thoughts, the doorbell rang. She walked to the door and opened it to find Lucas standing there, his face soft with concern. "Hey, I thought I'd stop by for a bit. How's everything going?" he asked. Sarah tried to smile, but it felt forced. "It's fine," she said quickly, not wanting to worry him. But Lucas wasn't fooled. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before landing on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Sarah hesitated for a moment before finally speaking, her voice trembling slightly. "I just got a call from the landlord. They're raising the rent. I can't afford it. I don't know what to do." Lucas didn't hesitate. He took a step toward her, his expression firm yet soft. "You don't have to worry about that. I'll take care of it." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't want to accept his help, didn't want to feel indebted to him, but the weight of it all was too much. "Lucas, I can't ask you to do that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to owe anyone." He gently took her hands in his gaze steady. "You're not asking for anything. I want to help. You don't have to do this alone, Sarah." She felt the tears threatening to fall, but she fought them back. It wasn't easy to admit that she needed help, but standing here with Lucas, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what to say." Lucas smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to say anything. Just let me take care of you for once." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the past few months lift off her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally letting herself believe that she wasn't alone anymore, that there was someone who truly cared, someone who wanted to share the burden with her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like everything would be okay. The days that followed were filled with a sense of peace that Sarah had never known. Lucas kept his promise, and they worked together to solve her housing situation. The rent was taken care of, and she could breathe again without the constant fear of losing her home. It was a relief, but it also stirred up a feeling Sarah wasn't used to: hope. It was strange to think that not long ago, she had been battling just to make it through each day. Now, with Lucas in her life, things were slowly falling into place. He was always there, steady and unwavering, a constant support when she needed it most. But as their relationship deepened, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was moving too fast. She had always been cautious, never allowing herself to get too close to anyone. It was easier to keep people at arm's length, to protect herself from getting hurt. But with Lucas, she couldn't help but feel vulnerable. Every time he held her hand, every time their eyes met, she felt like she was losing control. One afternoon, after another long day at work, Sarah sat on her couch, scrolling through her phone, when she saw a message from Lucas. "I've been thinking about us, and I want to talk. When you're ready, I'm here." Her heart skipped a beat. She knew what he meant. They had never really discussed what they were, what this was between them. And part of her was afraid to face that conversation. What if she wasn't ready for what he wanted? What if she wasn't enough? She set the phone down, her thoughts swirling. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. She had to be honest with him, even if it meant facing her own fears. That evening, she met him at a small park near her apartment. The air was crisp, the sun just beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over everything. Lucas was already there, waiting for her. As she approached, he stood up and smiled. "Hey," he said softly, as if sensing the tension in her. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, though her heart was racing. "I'm fine," she said, but it wasn't true. The weight of the conversation she had been avoiding hung heavy in the air. They walked to a bench and sat down, the silence between them comfortable but charged with unspoken words. After a few moments, Lucas broke the silence. "Sarah, I know we haven't talked about where this is going, but I need you to know something." He paused, his gaze steady and intense. "I care about you, more than I ever thought I could care about anyone. And I want to be with you, if you're willing to let me." Sarah felt her chest tighten, her mind racing. She had always been afraid of trusting, afraid of letting someone in. But as she looked into Lucas's eyes, she saw nothing but sincerity. It was terrifying, but it was also exactly what she needed to hear. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I care about you too," she said, her words steady despite the storm inside her. "But I'm scared, Lucas. I'm scared of trusting, of letting someone in again. I've been hurt before, and I don't want to go through that again." Lucas's hand found hers, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze. "I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll take it at your pace, Sarah. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." The weight of his words settled in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could trust again. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had always believed. Weeks passed, and Sarah found herself in a place she never thought possible, a place where trust and love weren't just concepts, but real, tangible feelings that she could hold in her hands. The fear that had once gripped her heart began to fade, and in its place, a quiet certainty grew. Lucas had proven over and over again that he was different. He was there for her, not because he felt obligated, but because he truly cared. And with each passing day, the bond between them deepened, not out of need, but out of mutual respect and affection. Sarah still had moments of doubt, of course. It was hard to shake off the scars of the past, the betrayals and heartbreaks that had shaped her. But Lucas never wavered. He gave her space when she needed it, but he also gave her the reassurance that, when she was ready, he would be there. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Lucas invited her to a quiet dinner at his apartment. It had become their tradition, just the two of them, enjoying each other's company without the distractions of the world around them. As they sat at the table, the soft glow of the candles flickering between them, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of calm she had never known before. The weight of the world seemed to slip away when she was with him. They talked about everything, life, dreams, the future. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of hope for what was to come. "You know," Lucas said, his voice low and thoughtful, "I never thought I'd find someone like you. Someone who challenges me, who makes me see the world differently." Sarah smiled, feeling her heart swell at his words. "I never thought I'd find someone who truly understands me, who doesn't try to fix me, but just accepts me for who I am." Lucas reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "I'm not here to fix you, Sarah. I'm here to be with you, to support you, to walk beside you through whatever comes our way." His words were simple, but they carried a depth that made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion. She had spent so many years believing that she had to do everything alone, that she had to protect herself from the world. But with Lucas, she was learning that it was okay to let go, to trust, and to allow herself to be cared for. As the evening came to a close, Lucas stood and walked over to her side of the table. He held out his hand, and Sarah took it, standing up to face him. I've never been good at waiting for things, he said with a smile, but I'm willing to wait for you. For however long it takes. Sarah's heart raced at his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in a future with him, a future where they could build something real, something lasting. I'm ready, she whispered, her voice full of quiet determination. I'm ready to trust, to love, and to see where this takes us. Lucas smiled, his eyes filled with warmth and affection. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Together, they would face whatever came next, hand in hand, ready to embrace the future they had always dreamed of, side by side.